remember one of the first dates that Jen and I went on. I'd started talking with her on the phone. We'd connect on the phone. And then I was going to go see her in Saskatoon. That's where she was working. And we were going to go rollerblading. So I remember, getting there, and I had to buy a new pair of rollerblades. And the first thing I did is I took the brakes off the rollerblades. I don't know why. Maybe because I was in Saskatchewan. Maybe because I thought that, girls really dig dudes that don't have brakes on their rollerblades. Like, whatever. I don't know. Took them off. Anyways, we go rollerblading then, along the river in Saskatoon. And then we get to, the university, and it's super beautiful there. And I'm so pumped, right? I'm with her. I think she's amazing. I'm just thinking about what could be down the road, this is the beginning of something beautiful, and she's going to think I'm amazing, and because we're going to have this awesome date. And I remember we rollerblade up, to the university, and there's this place at the university where there's this sidewalk that you can kind of go up and then go over top, and you can circle down on the other side. And I remember I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm going to zoom up this bridge, and I'm going to come flying down on the other side super fast. And Jen's going to think that's amazing. This is going to be so cool. And I remember I had it so worked out in my mind how amazing this was going to be. She was going to think I was awesome, and she totally want to date me forever and marry me. And so I get up there and I start going up on this circle thing, and I get to the top of the bridge, and I start to come down the other side, and all of a sudden I realize, man, I'm in serious trouble because I'm picking up a lot of speed. And I realized I'm not going to make that corner on the other end of this walking bridge, right? I'm going to come flying to that edge, not make it, hit the rail, fall down, basically die. That's terrible. Or by some miracle, I'm making that turn and then shoot back onto the highway equally dead. There's no hope here. It's just dead and I'm done. And so I begin to kind of panic, right? I start to try to go side to side and do the ski thing. To kind of maybe slow, but it's narrow, so I can't slow it down that way. And then I think to myself, maybe I should grab the chain link fence that goes up the side, but I'm it's going to rip my fingers off, and I'd love to hold her hand, but that would be awkward. So I'm just this is so bad. And I remember in my mind just all my hope for the future just fading to nothing. And so in this moment of panic, I try to turn sideways and do, a hockey stop. That does not work with rollerblades. I go sideways and I just go wham, and I'm ah! And I just slide across the concrete, and I'm just sitting there thinking, it's over. I'm an idiot. She is never talking to me again. And as I'm lying there, I look up and I realize, oh my, she hasn't been watching me. She's been following me. And she is equally out of control. And she's flying at me full speed, and she just bails. But unlike me, who landed on the cement, she lands on top of me. Boom! And then I'm I just caught her. And then I'm I saved you. Hope again. Date on, right? This is going to be awesome because I'm the one who saved your life. So awesome. It's so funny, this thing of hope, right? Man, we need it. We need hope. But sometimes it feels really fleeting, really fragile. We can just lose it in a moment, especially when things are hard, especially when things get hard. Now, this is why I love Easter so much, right? Easter for Christians is the best time of year because Easter is where we celebrate what Christ has done for us, right? Easter is where we celebrate his love for us, shown through his work on the cross. I mean, the cross is the greatest expression of love that you and I could ever experience, I mean, Jesus comes to earth, God's Son, becomes a human being, goes on the cross, takes our sin on himself, faces the punishment you and I deserve for sins we have committed. This is real. He does that for us. And then somehow, miraculously, right, he gives us this new identity. He places his rightness on us so we can be back in right relationship with God. And it begins to this restoring, this renewing. I mean, this is his love for us, I love Easter. I love the cross. But I think as much as I love the cross, I actually love the resurrection, He didn't just die. The Bible says that 3 days later, he rose again. And while the cross is the expression of his love, it's his resurrection that gives us hope. It just like, it gives us so much hope that no matter what the suffering is that we're going through, no matter how hard it is, and the suffering is real, the world is broken, we are broken, relationships are broken. This is a result of sin. Our sin has left us broken in our relationship with God, and it's left us broken in our relationship with each other. That's real. We live in this. Jesus lived in it too, right? When he became a human being, he also went through the suffering. He experienced what it was to be betrayed. He experienced what it was for people to hate on him. He experienced what it was to be misunderstood. He experienced what it was to go to the cross. He gets suffering. He gets it. He understands us when we go through suffering because he too has gone through suffering. He gets it. But it didn't own him. He owned it when he rose again from the dead. Suffering didn't control him. It didn't keep him. Instead, he moved to life. And now because he has experienced life, he brings us life. And the promise he gives us is that one day we will have hope beyond suffering when we too experience the eternal life completely. We start to taste it now. We start to experience hope. We start to experience belonging, identity, significance, those things we're wired for because of Jesus. We start to experience it, but we will experience it fully in heaven. Are you kidding me? That's our hope beyond suffering. We also have this incredible hope because of the resurrection that he is with us, like in the suffering, He's not distant. When it's too much for us, he is interceding for us. He is praying for us before the Father. That's what the Spirit does. And then he brings the goodness back to us that we need to carry on. He's with us in it. But more than that, he actually sees us through it. He sees us through the suffering, you guys. How does he do that? Because he's using it. I mean, this is the miracle of God that he can actually use the suffering to bring about his great good. This work he is of bringing good, of making things new, he even uses brokenness and suffering to bring about good. Okay, where do we see it? Romans chapter 8. Here's what it says in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. He says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who have been called according to his purpose." Do you hear me? Hear this again. He says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." Now, I want you to understand something. I think this is really important. He's not saying that all things are good. That's not what he's saying. Let's be really clear. Not everything is good. We experience a lot of hard things. We experience things that are really bad. We experience it when relationships end. That's not good. When people die, that's not good. When we're consumed by fear and anxiety, that's not good. When we hurt others, it's not good, okay? Not everything is good. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that he can work all things for good. One of the things that I do is I run. And I'm going to, I'm getting a little bit older. That's just the reality. So if I run, it helps keep my head right. I feel better. But here's what, I feel better, but not while I'm running. The running isn't good, you guys. I got to be honest with you. Running itself, for me, it's not good. It's being done running that's good. It's when the pain and suffering of running is over that I actually, experience something good. I don't like running. I like being done running, okay? Hey, just because we choose to follow Jesus, our hope isn't that everything is good now. The hope is that he can bring good out of everything. Out of anything, he can bring good out of that, right? I mean, listen to what it says. He says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good to those who have been called according to his purpose." He is at work in all things. He is bringing good out of all things. I think one of the things that sometimes we do is when things get difficult and we suffer, we just assume that God is mad at us, that somehow we've screwed up, he's punishing us. But that's actually that's not how God works. When Jesus went to the cross, he took our punishment for us already. He disciplines us. He allows us to experience difficult things, but not to punish us, but so that he can use those things to change and transform us, to bring something good in our lives. He can. In John chapter 15, Jesus is praying for his disciples. Listen to what he says. He says, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it might bear more fruit. This whole idea of pruning, it's really violent. It's hard. It's difficult. It's removing things. There's a suffering in the pruning. But what he says is that he does that so there can be even more fruit that takes place. Here's what I want to be really clear. Not everything we experience is good. But the truth of the matter is that God can take everything and bring good out of it. And this is what he does. How do we know that to be true? Because that's what happened with Jesus. The worst moment in all history when Jesus Christ went to the cross became the greatest moment in all eternity when he rose again. And he showed us that not even death had the power to keep him, right? And so we don't have to fear death because it doesn't get the final say. When we follow Jesus, the same power that raised him up is the power at work in us. And it's not just a power that's going to raise us from dead, but it's a power that begins to bring good even in the midst of the suffering, even in the hardship. This is our hope, you guys. We have hope in this, man. We have hope through suffering because God is using the suffering to do something good in us. Even when the suffering isn't good, he uses it to do something good in us. You know, my dad died when I was in high school. And that was a terrible, that wasn't good. There's nothing good about someone losing their dad, let's be clear. And for years, it was so hard, so hard. But you know, through that time, God began to change my relationship with him. I remember the moment after my father had passed away and I was just by myself going, who's going to be my dad now? And I remember hearing God say to me, I'm going to be your father. And it says in Psalm 68 verse 5, a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows is God Almighty. And in a very real way, he began to change me. God became my father and I experienced it in a way that I could have never experienced it if my dad was still alive. Now, my dad was my best friend. Don't get me wrong. Love my dad. I wish he would have never died. But in another sense, God used that to change me in such a powerful way that I wouldn't trade the experience I have with God now for what I had with my father back then. And it's also given me the ability to help people who are really hurting and broken in a way that I would have never been able to do it. And it doesn't mean that his death was good. It means that God can bring good out of even death. Because that's what Jesus did when he rose from the grave. You guys, that's our hope. There is not a single wasted moment for people who follow Jesus because God can use every single moment for his good purpose. He's always working for our good, even when we don't see it, even when it's hard to imagine, even when other people are working for our destruction because it's really bad, it's not good, God is still working for our good. You guys, this is our hope of Easter. This is the hope of resurrection. So what do we need to do? Well, I think the thing that we have to do is make sure that it's God that we love and not just his gifts, you know? I want to back that up. I'm sorry, Nate, because I want to hit a question right there, okay? So I want to end it at, so what do we need to do? I don't want that part. I'm just going to go straight to the question, okay? So here's a question that I want you guys to talk about here, just for a few minutes, okay? So circle up, talk with people around you. Have you been in a difficult situation that God has used to bring a greater good in your life? Have you ever experienced that? Or is there a situation right now that you need God to bring a greater good in your life? Why don't you go ahead and talk about that for just a few minutes? Okay, so what do we do with that, right? What do we do in the midst of the suffering and in the midst of the hardship? Here's how I think we go through. I think what we have to make sure is that we love God and we don't just love the gift of God. So if we just love his gifts, right? If we just love the things that God gives us, I mean, when suffering comes, our relationship with Jesus will be gone. We'll have no hope. Because by very definition, suffering means we're losing something good. And in a broken world, you know, because of sin, creation groans, we groan, we experience suffering, we lose good things. And if we only love God's gifts, then we will be lost when we lose those things. But when we realize that, hey, we enjoy the gifts, We're thankful for the gift of health. We're thankful for the gift of good friends. We're thankful for the gift of good resources and stuff. We're thankful for those things, but we don't love them. We actually love God. Then in the midst of suffering, we can be okay because we don't lose God. He's at work, right? He's renewing things. He's working all things out. And listen to what he says. He says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. All things. Hey, I don't do details very well. Like, I really don't. Like, I'm pretty bad at details. I mean, it was just a while ago when I went to the airport. I had a flight early in the morning. Got to the airport. I got up to get on to my flight. I showed them my license, and they're like, hey, your license has expired. You can't get on this plane. I'm like, are you serious? They're like, yep. I'm like, I got to get on this plane. And then they're like, well, why don't you go home and get your passport? Then you can get on the next plane. And I'm like, okay. I go home, get my passport. I come back. I get on that next plane. I'm supposed to be going to Edmonton, but I get to Calgary, right? And then I'm going to get another plane to Edmonton. When I go to get back on the plane in Calgary, I show them my passport. They're like, hey, your passport has expired. I'm like, you're kidding me. License expired, passport expired, everything's expired. They let me fly to Edmonton because it's partway through my trip. But when I get to Edmonton, they tell me I can't get home because I don't care about details. Sometimes details matter. They really matter. They sure matter when you're hurting, right? They sure matter when things are difficult and hard, right? Those details matter in those moments. Hey, I might not get details, but God does. He says that he can work all things out for good. There is nothing you're going through right now, no suffering you're going through, no matter how small, no matter how big, that in some way God can't bring good out of it. Because this is what he did on the cross and then through the resurrection, you know? When Jesus died on the cross for us, of course, like, the greatest expression of love that you and I could ever experience, but it was the worst moment in history. But he rises again, it becomes the greatest moment in eternity. And it says that if there's a power that can bring Jesus from the dead, he says that power is also at work in you now, bringing life in the midst of whatever suffering or death you're going through. And so when you love God, not just his gifts, but when you love God and you trust him, you guys, we have the hope that Easter gives us. It's the hope of his resurrection. And we can persevere. We can make it because we have hope. And man, we need hope. We need hope. So I love Easter. Love Easter. I love the cross because the cross is the greatest expression of love that you and I could ever experience. But it's not just the cross that makes me love Easter. More than that, it's the resurrection because it's his resurrection that gives us hope. And you guys, man, we need hope.